What you're about to hear is not a conspiracy theory. It is documented, sourced, and frankly, it changes the way you look at an industry that touches billions of people every single day. The game rating system that parents trust to protect their children, the one printed on every box, displayed on every digital storefront. It has never once independently tested a single game, not one. The regulators don't play the games. They can't. And the companies that make those games know this better than anyone. That is where this story begins. But it goes much deeper than a rating label. What we are going to examine today is the architecture of information control inside the gaming and tech industry. Not rumors, not leaks from anonymous sources, parliamentary records, Securities and Exchange Commission filings, court documents made public through federal litigation, the kind of evidence that doesn't disappear. Let us start with the rating system itself, because the gap at its foundation is more significant than most people realize. The Entertainment Software Rating Board, or SRB, is the organization responsible for assigning age ratings to video games in North America. You have seen its labels your entire life. Everyone has. E for everyone, T for teen, M for mature. The system carries enormous cultural authority. Retailers use it to decide what they stock. Parents use it to make purchasing decisions. Politicians reference it when arguing that the industry self-regulates responsibly. Here's what almost nobody knows about how those ratings are actually assigned. The ESRB does not play the games it rates. Publishers submit a written questionnaire describing the content of their game. Along with video footage they select themselves. There is no independent testing process. There is no SRB employee sitting down with a controller and working through the game. According to the ESRB's own publicly available documentation on their rating process, the entire system operates on submitted materials chosen by the very companies seeking the rating. The organization trusts the submitting publisher to accurately represent what their product contains. This is not a loophole buried in fine print. It is the documented official process, and it remained essentially unchallenged until the summer of 2005. Rockstar Games released Grand Theft Auto San Andreas with a T for teen rating in mind for some markets, though it ultimately received an M for mature. But inside the game's code, buried beneath layers of disabled content, was a fully rendered interactive sexual scene known as the Hot Coffee mod. The content had been developed, completed, and then supposedly locked away, but it had not been removed from the disk. When a modder unlocked it, the fallout was immediate. The SRB upgraded the game's rating to adults only, a designation so commercially toxic that major retailers stopped carrying it entirely. Rockstar faced a Federal Trade Commission investigation. The game was temporarily pulled from shelves. What made this significant beyond the scandal itself was what it exposed structurally. Rockstar had submitted materials for SRB review that did not disclose this content. According to congressional testimony given by SRB President Patricia Vance in 2005, and documented in the Federal Trade Commission's report on marketing violent entertainment to children, the ESRB had no mechanism to discover content that wasn't disclosed in the submission. They rated what they were shown. Full stop. The hot coffee incident did not fundamentally change the submission process. Publishers still control what footage gets sent for review. The SRB introduced some additional certification requirements and random audits of submitted materials, but the core architecture, self-reported content, selected footage, no independent gameplay verification, remains the foundation of the system today. The regulator is by design dependent on the accuracy and honesty of the entity being regulated. Now, you might accept that tension as an unavoidable limitation of rating entertainment. But what happens when the content being concealed isn't accidental? What happens when it is structural, built into the economic model of the product itself? That question leads us directly to loot boxes, and to a set of documents that the gaming industry would very much prefer you hadn't read. The popular narrative about loot boxes is that they emerged from the mobile gaming world, spreading upward into big-budget console games as developers chased new revenue streams. That story is tidy, but it misses the actual origin of the mechanic. Loot boxes were not invented. They were reverse engineered from physical gambling psychology, and the companies that deployed them most aggressively hired the people with the specific expertise to do it. Electronic Arts and Activision during the early 2010s brought in behavioral economists with backgrounds in casino design research. This is documented, not speculative, and the specific psychological research they applied goes back much further than the digital age. The surprise reward mechanic at the core of every loot box, the random reveal, the variable reward interval, the escalating anticipation, traces directly to studies of gambling behavior, to the psychology of physical trading cards, and to a phenomenon that behavioral scientists refer to as intermittent reinforcement. The same psychological mechanism that makes slot machines compelling makes a loot box feel worth opening. What makes the Electronic Arts case particularly remarkable is that the company acknowledged this connection in writing to a government body. In 2019, the United Kingdom Parliament's Digital, Culture, Media, and Sport Committee launched an investigation into immersive and addictive technologies. EA submitted a written response. In that document, EA representatives used the phrase surprise mechanics to describe their loot box systems, and they explicitly referenced the psychological parallels to other forms of entertainment, including physical collectibles. The submission was made public. The Belgian Gaming Commission had already ruled a year earlier, in 2018, that FIFA's Ultimate Team Card packs constituted gambling under Belgian law, a ruling that forced EA to remove the feature from the game in Belgium entirely. The internal research documents EA filed with Parliament confirmed what industry critics had argued for years. The design of FIFA Ultimate Team packs was informed by the psychology of surprise and variable reward, and the company had studied that literature carefully. They did not stumble onto an accidentally compelling mechanic. They engineered it with the help of people who understood exactly what they were building. And then they submitted those games for content ratings. Ratings that evaluated violence, language, and sexual content. Not predatory monetization mechanics. This is a point worth sitting with. The rating system was built for a different era of games. A box product with fixed content. The regulatory categories it uses, content descriptors, age thresholds, were not designed to evaluate a game that contains an engineered psychological mechanism designed to maximize spending through variable reward. The ESRB has added an in-game purchases label to games with these features, but that label makes no distinction between buying a cosmetic outfit and a randomized loot box with deliberate psychological architecture behind it. But let's move from what's hidden to what's misrepresented, because there is a second layer of information control in this industry, and it involves money. Specifically, how much of it actually gets spent making the games that generate billions in revenue. When a major game studio announces a development budget, the figure that appears in press coverage, in investor presentations, and in industry analysis almost universally refers to the production cost only. Marketing costs, which include not just television and digital advertising but also physical distribution, infrastructure, influencer arrangements, review copies, launch event productions, and ongoing community management, are almost never included in the publicly reported figure. And in many cases, those marketing and distribution costs equal or significantly exceed the production budget. Take Red Dead Redemption 2 as a documented example. Rockstar's parent company, Take-Two Interactive, reported production costs of approximately $170 million in their Securities and Exchange Commission filings for 2018. That figure received enormous media coverage as one of the most expensive games ever made. Analysts at Cowen and Company, along with reporting in Game Developer magazine, estimated that the total spend, including marketing and distribution, exceeded $540 million. That makes Red Dead Redemption 2 not just one of the most expensive games ever produced, but one of the most expensive entertainment products in history. In any medium, the production number alone, 170 million, tells a story of a passionate, resource-intensive creative endeavor. The full number, over $500 million, tells a completely different story about how the entertainment industry operates, where marketing has become as expensive as creation itself. Publishers are not required to disclose marketing budgets in most jurisdictions, and they don't. The result is a systematically incomplete picture of the economics of game development, one that always makes the return on investment look more impressive than the full picture would support. But perhaps no piece of financial information in the gaming industry was left unexamined as thoroughly as what happened when a competitor forced a specific question into the open. How much does it actually cost to deliver a digital game to a consumer? And what share of revenue is a platform entitled to take? For years, Steam, the dominant PC gaming marketplace operated by Valve, charged developers a 30% revenue share on all sales. This number was treated as essentially fixed, a fact of life for anyone distributing PC games. And for years, few people questioned its origin. Here is its origin. According to internal Valve communications that were made publicly available as exhibits in the Federal Trade Commission versus Apple litigation. Federal court proceedings filed in 2021. Valve adopted the 30% figure in 2003, not because of any analysis of the actual cost of delivering digital distribution services, but because 30% was the margin that physical brick-and-mortar retailers had charged for shelf space. When Valve built the infrastructure for Steam, they looked at what retail had always charged and copied the number. When Epic Games launched the Epic Games Store in 2018 with a 12% revenue share, a number Tim Sweeney, Epic's chief executive officer, publicly justified at the Game Developers Conference in 2019 by pointing to actual delivery cost analysis. Valve's internal response, also visible in those same court documents per reporting. By The Verge acknowledged that Steam had the margin capacity. The 30% had never been tied to the cost of running the service. It was legacy pricing, justified by nothing more than historical precedent, maintained because competition hadn't yet forced a change. Developers had been paying what amounted to an arbitrary tax, rationalized by an era of physical retail that no longer existed, to a marketplace that had analyzed its own costs and still chosen not to pass savings forward. Now, if you think the financial architecture of this industry is opaque at the revenue level, consider what happens at the hardware level, where the stakes once got high enough that a government classified a gaming chip as a weapon. Sony's PlayStation 2 became the best-selling gaming console ever produced, reaching 155 million units sold over its lifetime. Its success is typically attributed to its library, its DVD playback capability, and its price positioning. But one chapter of its history is almost entirely absent from mainstream gaming coverage. In the year 2000, the United States Department of Commerce's Bureau of Export Administration placed the PlayStation 2 on an export watch list. The reason was the console's central processing chip, the Emotion Engine, which had been developed by Sony and Toshiba with parallel processing architecture so advanced for its time that it was classified as dual-use military technology. The same regulatory category applied to weapons components and advanced cryptographic systems. The Japanese government had already flagged the chip under similar export control reasoning. The EAE Spectrum, a publication of the Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers, published a technical analysis of the Emotion Engine's architecture that explained why regulators reached this conclusion. The chipbox parallel floating point processing capability was at the time comparable to what supercomputers were achieving in certain computational tasks. Wired magazine covered the situation directly in April of 2000, describing the geopolitical tension around a consumer entertainment product that had inadvertently crossed into military technology classification territory. Sony had built a gaming machine so powerful that governments briefly questioned whether selling it abroad constituted a transfer of militarily significant technology. The restrictions were ultimately resolved, and the CS2 sold globally without long-term interruption. But the episode reveals something important. The technical ambitions of consumer electronics have, at moments in history, outpaced the regulatory frameworks built to govern them. And then there are the moments where the ambitions of companies conflict with their own internal standards, where the corporate myth meets documented internal reality. Nintendo has cultivated one of the most powerful brand identities in entertainment history, built substantially around the concept of quality. That reputation isn't entirely mythological. Nintendo does maintain an internal testing department called the Mario Club, based in Kyoto, that employs over 100 full-time staff whose sole function is to evaluate unreleased games, not for bugs, but for feel. For the subjective quality of interaction that game designers sometimes call game feel. The responsiveness of controls. The satisfaction of a jump landing. The question of whether a mechanic is not just functional but genuinely enjoyable. Shigeru Miyamoto, in his keynote address at the Game Developers Conference in 2007, confirmed that the Mario Club's feedback has delayed Nintendo titles by 6 to 12 months. Not because the games were broken, but because something about the experience didn't feel right. This is an extraordinary institutional commitment. The Nintendo Iwata Asks Developer interview series, archived and published by Nintendo, contains multiple accounts from developers describing how Mario Club evaluations led to the complete redesign or removal of core game mechanics. But Nintendo's documented commitment to quality has a counterpart in an industry-wide phenomenon. That is, by survey data, significantly worse than its public acknowledgement suggests. Crunch, the practice of extended mandatory overtime during the final development phase of a game, is widely known to exist. What is less widely discussed is the scale at which it operates and the counterproductive effect its practitioners openly acknowledge. In 2021, the International Game Developers Association surveyed 2,700 developers across the industry. The findings, published in their Developer Satisfaction Survey, were stark. 42% of respondents reported working more than 10 hours of unpaid overtime per week during crunch periods. 8% reported more than 20 extra unpaid hours per week. And 61% said that crunch was considered normal and expected at their studio. Not exceptional, not a crisis response, but the default operating assumption. The figure that stands out most sharply is this. 81% of those same developers said they believed crunch actively reduced the final quality of the games they were making. Jason Schreier's investigative book, Blood, Sweat, and Pixels, published in 2017 by Harper Business, documented the human and creative cost of crunch at major studios in granular detail. Kotaku's investigative reporting on the same topic reinforced those findings with additional studio-specific accounts. The industry's crunch problem is not a secret. It is an acknowledged practice that the majority of its own practitioners believe makes products worse, and yet structural and competitive pressures have made it the default mode of operation at most major studios. A system that produces worse results continues because it is embedded in schedules, contracts, and competitive dynamics that no single studio can unilaterally escape. And now one final piece of this picture, one that connects the industry's financial architecture to its technological ambitions in a way that most consumers never consider. When Microsoft announced its acquisition of Activision Blizzard for $68.7 billion, it was reported as the largest acquisition in gaming history, which it was. What received significantly less attention was the mechanism through which the deal was actually funded. Microsoft did not draw down its cash reserves to fund the purchase. According to the company's Securities and Exchange Commission, 8K filing from January of 2022, the acquisition was structured through debt financing. Microsoft issued corporate bonds at interest rates between 4.0 and 5.9%, effectively borrowing the acquisition price from bond markets. Bloomberg's analysis of the bond issuance confirmed the structure. Wedbush securities analyst Michael Pachter, in a 2022 research note, calculated that for the debt to be justified by Activision's revenue contribution, Microsoft's Game Pass subscription service would need to add approximately 9 to 12 million net new subscribers, attributable solely to the deal. Microsoft had not purchased a gaming company outright. They had placed a structured financial bet, one in which Activision's future revenue streams needed to outperform the interest cost of the debt over time. The Wall Street Journal described it as precisely that, a bet. One of the largest in entertainment industry history, funded not by accumulated wealth, but by borrowed capital, premised on subscriber growth projections for a subscription service that had not yet proven it could reach those numbers organically. The gaming industry, at its highest levels, operates with the same financial leverage and risk architecture as any other mature media sector. The difference is that its public-facing narrative, built around passion, creativity, and cultural significance, rarely makes that legible. What emerges from all of this, when you look at the documented evidence together, is a picture of an industry that is far more sophisticated in managing its own image than it is often given credit for, and far less transparent than the regulatory frameworks that nominally govern it require it to be. The rating system trusts publishers to describe their own content accurately. The marketing economics are systematically withheld from the figures that get reported. The psychological architecture of monetization features was engineered with expertise borrowed from casino behavioral science, and then submitted for ratings review under categories that weren't built to evaluate. The financial structures behind the industry's largest moves are complex enough that most coverage reduces them to a single headline number. None of this requires a conspiracy. It requires only that institutions optimize for their own interests within the systems they operate in, and that the systems themselves weren't built with sufficient teeth to demand more. Understanding how an industry actually works underneath the marketing and the mythology is not cynicism. It is the beginning of being an informed participant in the culture it produces. If this is the kind of examination you want to keep going, evidence first, sourced, and willing to follow the logic wherever it leads, this channel is where that work happens.